welcome. We'll begin now. Great to see so many people turning up here this evening on almost the shortest day of the year, which is in a couple of days. So really great to have a good turnout of Taupo locals, and I know some people travel from Mangakino and elsewhere, so really awesome. This evening we're going to be having a presentation by Dick Rennie, who's a climate researcher. He's had over 40 years of experience, and he's going to give a talk on climate science versus alarmism. We've seen over the recent years, in 2020 or 2021, New Zealand declared that we were in a climate emergency. And we have seen in recent history as well, with a so-called health emergency, the lens that the governments and councils will go to enforce things in an emergency type situation. So we need to be mindful and aware of that. There's more people coming, which is great. So in about 10 minutes, we're going to have a 30-minute presentation, 31st of August 2022. Taupo District Council has demonstrated its commitment to helping address climate change, adopting a set of directives and emission reduction targets in its monthly meeting yesterday. So the councillors have committed to implement these climate policies, and with the community's help, there are substantial amounts of money that could also be saved in some areas. Solid waste levies currently cost 1.8 million to us, and carbon credit costs, and this expense is rising year on year. So we're seeing this cost coming in, regulations coming in, based on a certain set of evidence and facts that we may see this evening may not be as objective as the mainstream is making it seem. As the science is settled. Whenever we hear the science is settled, that is almost the most unscientific thing you could hear, because science is always trying to prove or disprove its own theory. So when someone says, "Oh, the climate science is settled," question mark, because that's a contradictory statement. Also, a big thank you. We've got Taupo District Councillor Duncan Campbell here this evening. So thank you for coming. He's going to be taking some questions and answers from 6:30 to 6:45. So any questions we have, and a really good, we've got the Deputy Mayor here this evening, Kevin, what was your name? Kevin Taylor. So we really appreciate the councillors taking their time out of their busy schedule. They do good work in the community. They are part of the community. So we appreciate them taking their time to come here and listen, hear our questions, hear our concerns, get this information from Dick Rennie, which I'm really looking forward to. And I read a very good article you wrote in 2022 and was online, The Fraud of the 21st Century. That's what the title of the piece was, and it was about the climate alarmism. It's a climate emergency, and there's quite a few here, senior people. When I was at school, I was told there was going to be global cooling. We were heading towards an ice age. We've seen over the years the climate push for climate. I'll say agenda. There is an agenda behind it. Has been going on a long time, and we know the seasons. We all get firewood. We all keep our houses warm. We're not giving up our double glazing or whatever because it's getting supposed to be getting a little bit warmer. And a lot of the policies on the Taupo District Council website, a lot of the information is related to the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So, and this is a worldwide thing that's happening in Canada, England. They're getting taxed on their natural gas. Their cost of living is going up. It's affecting also the managed retreats, the possible climate adaptation plans, which really, if you were zoned in a flood zone or if they predict some climate event could happen, it's not so good for your private property rights. You can be retreated out of where you live. So it's an important, very important topic and subject to be educated on and talk to those, our elected officials, that want to do the best for the community, who care about their community, and as we all care about, the community and the future for our next generations, our families that all live around here and in New Zealand. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dick Rennie, 40-year climate researcher, to share some of his knowledge and insights for us. So,
it is such a large subject now right throughout the world, and I think that what we have to do is promote the subject in a manner that is understood by everybody and not wound up in politics and pseudoscience and other reasons for twisting it into a manipulation whereby it gives governments the opportunities to tax us further in these taxes that they're talking about. Now, climate is driven by some very sizable forces. The main ones are the sun, the solar system, the earth, and cosmic energy. Now, mankind has no control over these forces. These dominating factors decide what our climate is going to be like. What do we need to do? We need to learn to adapt to these changes. We can't change them. So if we're going to live in this world, we need to learn to adapt to them. In the past, species that have failed to adapt have become extinct. We don't want that, but change what you can. Now, in climate science, I've just thrown a couple of questions up here to start off with. Climate change, is it real? Of course it's real. The climate is changing all the time, and it has changed since that Thursday, 4,500 million years ago, and it's still changing. So people who say it's not going to be changing, it is. And that's one of the certainties with climate change. Do humans have anything to do with it? Essentially, no. The major part of climate is controlled by natural forces. Is there a climate emergency? Absolutely not. There is no emergency now. There never has been. And it's highly, highly unlikely that there will ever be one in the future. What is the true science? Hopefully, what I say tonight will give you that answer. Now, in climate science, it's a big subject. I can always remember the professor saying to me at university, "Do you really want to do this?" And he named all the disciplines, and there they are. He said, "You'll get the degree all right," but he said, "You'll spend the next 5 years learning each of those subjects." And one in climate science needs to have an understanding of those disciplines to know anything in the science world about climate. Now, the world has gone through significant changes in the last 2 to 3 million years. We have had the state of an ice ball. In other words, that the entire world is frozen right to the equator. We have a tropical Earth where the temperatures have averaged 20, 22, 23 degrees Celsius. Now, during that period, and that's been the major part of the Earth over the last 650 million years, we had the dinosaur era. Now, as everybody knows, dinosaurs were cold-blooded. Why? Because the temperature was hot enough for metabolism to take place without them needing to be warm-blooded. And Icehouse Earth, as the scientists in that field like to call it. And that's where we are now. And our average world temperature being 12 to 14 degrees. Now, during the last 800,000 years, the pattern of the cycles has changed. We have cycles of 100,000 years of ice ages. We came out of the last ice age around about 14,400 years ago. Prior to that, we dropped to a very frozen situation 26,500 years ago. And the Antarctic ice sheet extended to the bottom of the South Island. And many of you have seen the glacial lakes down there. So technically possible to walk to the South Pole. Now, with the change that occurred 14,400 years ago, we came into an interglacial. Now, the interglacials that have occurred over that last 800,000 years have been, on average, 12 to 15,000 years. So if you've just done the arithmetic in your head, we're getting to the end of our interglacial. And the graph is showing us that we are in quite a cold spell in this interglacial. We're getting to the end of it. During the period of that, we had the Holocene B warming period, which was the warmest. We went through the Mayan civilization, we had the Roman civilization where temperatures were hotter than they are now. Then we had the medieval warming period, which was 5 degrees hotter than what we have right now. There is the graph. Turn these lights out, just to give it a bit of. Yeah, just gives us a better picture. Yeah, that's better, thank you. Last interglacial, it's taken 80,000 years to drop into the Ice Age. What's interesting, we tend to come out of them pretty rapidly, over about 4,000 years to the present interglacial. And it's not, as you can see, a straight line. There's ups and downs, which is typical of climate change. Now, the climate alarmists telling us we're headed for trouble. That the gas in our atmosphere, known as carbon dioxide, is heating the earth and the world will burn out if we're not careful. They say this with certainty, claiming the science is settled. Well, let's just have a look at that for a moment. And what I'd like to do is just ask you a question, if I may. How much carbon dioxide do you know or think is in our atmosphere? Is it 1% or less? 5%? 15%? Or up to 30%? Going for the 1 or less, how many? Yeah. Oh, that's great, you're well informed. Love to hear that. That's wonderful. I've asked this question often. You'll be amazed how many went for that figure. That's great to know. Right. Now, just in case anybody didn't do chemistry, we use formulas in chemistry for the elements, and carbon dioxide is represented by CO, 2, because with the carbon atom, as a molecule with oxygen, it needs to have 2 atoms of oxygen to make a stable molecule. Now, how much was there? You've answered that question well. Many of you will have seen this pie graph, banded by the media, in the papers, spoken about, and you look at that and think, oh my God, look at that carbon dioxide figure. Now that is an absolute fraud.
That's correct.
This is what the media push. It is a total fraud. Why? The biggest greenhouse gas is not there. There is the true figure. 98% of the greenhouse gases around the earth are water vapour. As you can see, carbon dioxide is just a blip. Along with the other gases are there, methane and nitrous oxide. That's the true figure. Why aren't we attacking water? We can't. We can't control that. You've got humidity in the tropics, you've got dry regions as well. That is controlled by the bigger forces of nature. And just to give you another figure, we take carbon dioxide and say, well, hang on a minute, how much is put up by us and how much is put up by natural processes? There we go. 243 billion tonnes is put up by nature. We put up a measly 8. Are we really going to be altering the climate with that? You would need to have a pretty really bizarre thing. If we stop that 8 billion, we're going to change the climate, we're going to change the world. Nature's still going to go on putting that up. Or, as we've had recently, some of the scientists say, well, the 243 doesn't make any difference. It doesn't work. What we put up is different. Now, if anyone's done any chemistry, carbon dioxide is carbon dioxide. It doesn't come in different forms. Now, just to take this a little further, this is a graph, a grid graph of the whole gaseous content of our atmosphere. And everybody knows nitrogen dominates and oxygen is second with 21%. Water vapour. Now the water vapour one is interesting because in some regions, of course, it's quite a bit less than 3, it may be 2 to even 1, whereas you go to Singapore and you know it's about 5 or 6%, it's quite high. And we have the noble gases that are really quite inert and we never ever need to worry about them. And those gases are argon, neon, krypton, xenon, and so forth. They are the noble ones. And then you're thinking, well, where is carbon dioxide in this? And you've got to squint your eyes a little bit because it's right down there, all on its own, 0.04%. Now that's the total carbon dioxide, what nature puts up as well as what we put up. It's that small. And then you think, well, hang on a minute, we're all talking about methane at the moment, so we put that in as well. And we found that methane and carbon dioxide were so small that we couldn't fill even one square with them. So it overlaps there at 0.0166%. And again, that's the total methane. All of the methane coming out of the oceans and out of volcanoes and so forth. So that's how small it is. As a matter of interest, you and I all breathe in air with 0.04%. We all breathe out air with 100 times more carbon dioxide at 4%. So it's just a thought. Now, to try and illustrate this further, what I've done here is said, all right, let's take a pocket of air, 85,500 molecules of air. In that, there is only 33 molecules of carbon dioxide. And out of that, 32 are put up by nature. Mankind puts up that many. That's it. We take that out, the other 32 are still going to go on being there. Is the one going to change the climate? Now, we come to the question of science, and I said as I started on this that we have these alarmists who say that the climate science is a settled science. Well, let me say this, science is never settled. Scientific knowledge is doubling every 7 years, so it's impossible for it ever to be settled. Our friends also claim that a consensus of climate scientists agree that emissions by us are to blame. Well, in science there's no such thing. A consensus does not exist. Science is about facts, not opinions, repeatable, testable, reportable, factual data. In science you question everything. And as Linus says, that's how science is done. We do not just accept the word of a newspaper, the word of someone who says, well, the experts say this, so it must be right. Now, just coming back to carbon dioxide here a little bit, we've often been told by our previous climate change minister that carbon dioxide was a pollutant and we are polluting the atmosphere. Well, that's another falsehood. Carbon dioxide is absolutely vital for life on this planet. Not only for the plant kingdom and the botanical kingdom, and as you all know, when you did your biology at school, that the process of photosynthesis works, and the plants take in that carbon dioxide, and that's one of their nutrients. They grow from that.
Exactly.
But there's also something else that happens. Does anyone know the byproduct of photosynthesis?
Yes.
Absolutely. You and I need it every minute of the day and night. So it affects us too. It's not a pollutant. It is a life-giving gas. Now, here was an experiment done in the 1920s, and I've been privileged to see one at Cambridge University in 2005. They were doing the same thing. Now what they did, they took these pine trees and they put them in different glass houses, and they regulated the amount of carbon dioxide in the glass house. With the first one, they took the ambient figure, which at that time was 385 parts per million. You can see the growth of the tree. The next one had 150 parts added to make 535. The next one, 685, and of course with the last one, 450 parts per million were added, and we had 835. Now, the testing that's been done since then seems to confirm that maximum growth from good carbon dioxide levels is between 800 and 1,000 parts per million. Now, when we all leave this room tonight, the level may be up about that, especially in the winter when we've got all the windows closed. But the growth rate, as you can see in the file on there, over the same period of time is quite significant. Now, in the last 12 to 13 months, as my wife knows, I have spent a lot of time in front of the computer. I've been researching scientific papers from around the world and papers as far back as 1850. Why I picked 1850 is because that's when we had the first quality measurable thermometers. And we could get some accurate readings. I've researched 6,000 papers to find or try and find a link between carbon dioxide and temperature. That rising levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere cause the temperature to rise. In 6,000 papers, I did not find one. Not one. And when I looked into it and communicated with Professor Plimer, who's an Australian in the same mould, if you like, he had done it earlier. And he was saying things, that's it. If you've researched that, I've researched that, that hypothesis is dead. Nobody has been able to show it. So, why are they pushing it? And what we find is a lot of these institutional scientists who have jobs with government bodies want to keep their jobs. Also, by giving their boss a paper that they want, it secures their funding and secures their position, which is not a pleasant thing to say, but unfortunately in reality, that is the situation. Now, when it comes to an emergency, so what follows from what I've just said, do we have a climate emergency? Of course we don't. There is no such thing as an emergency in climate as I've just spelled out. It started with the Europeans, and I must give them credit for that because at the moment they are certainly leading the world on some of the science, the good science that's coming out. It's often been said that about 95% of the world's scientists say, yes, we've got global warming and humans are to blame, but no one's ever given us a list. The climate emergency called the Quintil Weather Organisation, Quintil meaning climate in Dutch, has produced the list. There are 2,000 names in this, every single one of them is in this list, country by country, of people, real people, who have signed the declaration. 22 from New Zealand. And at this point, I felt we should also put methane into the mix because for our farmers, that's become another issue. Now, methane in the atmosphere is so small, it is measured in parts per billion, whereas carbon dioxide we measure in parts per million. But methane is not stable. Once it reaches into the atmosphere, it is destroyed pretty quickly by two processes. One by oxidation, with the oxygen in the atmosphere, it is destroyed. And the second one with the hydroxide ion in the atmosphere. Now what happens there, it's a little different. The hydroxide ion, in destroying methane, reforms itself and goes on in a chain reaction, knocking out methane molecules so fast the methane never reaches the upper atmosphere to even cause anything like a degree of warming. And all the papers that have come out recently have just said the methane effect is totally irrelevant. We can disregard it. And those figures show it. Now, coming back to 1850, between 1350 and 1850, we went through a very cold period in the world called the Little Ice Age. And during the period from 1645 through to 1710, we had a thing called the Munda minimum, where temperatures reached an extremely low point. The Thames regularly froze over river. The Channel in 1671 froze right across to France. And the freezing of the Thames occurred during that Little Ice Age right up until 1820 was the last time that the Thames River froze over. And they used to have frost fairs. So it gives you an idea of how cold things were. By 1850, we came out of that little ice age, and our temperature, naturally, as you'd expect, began to warm. So, how much did it warm? Just that amount. Just that amount. There was also a period through the 20th century where we had some of the greatest advances in technology and the well-being of humans and the human race. Now, that period was very stable. And I have to say, in climate science or in paleoclimatology, that's unusual. It's not normal. We have found before, when we have left a warming period, there is a greater volatility of weather patterns, from extremely cold, dry, stormy, high winds, with its resulting effect of flooding and fires and so forth, and loss of life. In 1362, there was a massive North Sea storm. That storm flooded Holland, it flooded the coast of Germany. 100,000 people died. The Dutch remember it very well because it formed the Zuider Zee, that inland sea in Holland, which was not drained until the 20th century when the dike was built. But 100,000 people died. Now, if that happened today, and it could happen again, we know who would get the blame for it. Now, this paper came out very recently. It's very interesting, and I've often been intrigued by this because I've read a lot of papers from the scientists at NOAA and NASA who I have great respect for. You do, excuse me, you do not find NOAA and NASA often agreeing. But here we have an agreement with their work. They agree with each other. Sorry, NOAA, does anyone not know what that is? It's the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, and NASA, you probably know, National Aeronautic and Space Administration. Two American bodies that have stood the test of time and are very good references as a scientist. The Royal Society for Scientists gives us information from time to time and say, you no longer can use these bodies as references because they're unreliable. And we've just received a note to say our own NEWA is unreliable to use, so we can't use that anymore. Anyway, there we are, that we've got a full-blown grand solar minimum. And as a result, what happens there, when the sun goes through a quieter or quiescent period, there is less solar energy coming out, which means the normal blasting away of cosmic rays from outer space that have originated with some supernova explosion get through our atmosphere and begin to seed the water vapor in our atmosphere, which then forms clouds and low-level clouds. Now that then starts to shield the energy from the sun and changes our climate. And the estimate is that if we have a 2 to a 3% increase in cloud cover of the Earth, we will definitely go into the next ice age. So clouds play an important part in climate. And there we just a shot there of the cosmic rays sealing the water molecules. Now, the other factor is a local Earth factor, and again, something else we have no control over is volcanoes. Now, volcanoes are interesting because I think as many of you who've lived in Taupo for any length of time will remember back in the 1960s and 70s, Naraho just quietly smoked away all the time. You could see it just vaporizing out there, just steadily putting up its gas, and what you saw mostly was steam, because this carbon dioxide it puts up, or did put up, you can't see. Carbon dioxide is a tasteless, odorless, colourless gas. You can't see it. So what we saw was steam. not carbon dioxide. That doesn't mean we didn't get it. We did, but we couldn't see it. Now, with the Tongan eruption, we have an interesting situation here. It is a marine volcano. The base of that volcano is on the seabed. And when it erupted, the heat generated such a capacity, or generated to such a capacity, produced a huge amount of water vapor. And if you look at this corner here, you can actually see a spout coming out of the water here. Now, when the volcanoes that are marine volcanoes do that, the amount of moisture that they put up into the atmosphere is so huge that we get a situation which we call an atmospheric river. And that's what we have with Tonga. Now, it's still erupting. It started on the 14th of January 2023. So here we are, you might say 18 months later, and it's still putting out. It is still erupting. Very much like Pinatubo in the Philippines did in 1981. And that had its effect on New Zealand. Ask any North Canterbury farmer what the winter of 1992 was like. Some may remember the heavy snowfalls. That's the picture from the Hawke's Bay Today paper, taken 5 months later, 18th of June, and that's the early morning glow from the aerosol factor of the eruption. Now, this part, I must say I do struggle with this part a little bit because I've done some research on it, and I was concerned when Greta Thunberg started her program, her pilgrimage, to do her work with wanting to say we've got to act. What's happened is that our children have taken up that word. They have been, I think the word's greenwashed. They are concerned. And it really concerned me to the point when a letter from a school teacher, Anne Parker, who is a school teacher in Green Island, which is a little town south of Dunedin, wrote this letter to the Herald on the 2nd of April last year, suffering of the children. I stood in front of my class of 11-year-olds and suggested that they write an essay about what they would like to do when they're grown up. Immediately their faces fell, the whole class. I stood bewildered by their reaction, and finally a boy raised his hand to explain, "Miss, we won't be alive." He said the class, the whole class, nodded their heads. Now, are we really wanting to put that sort of pressure on our children? So what I did, as I say, it was of great concern. I went to the statistics department, and after battling with them, because this sort of information is always hard to come by, what was our suicide level like in New Zealand last year? We had 124 suicides from people under the age of 22. 8 of those were children, between the ages of 11 and 14, because they saw no future. That's a tragedy. Very concerning. I'll just come back to that. That is from a climate scientist. Sorry, institutional scientist. That was his move to try and scare people into following his instructions and doing something about it. Some of you may know James Rennick. James works for the government, and there it is in his article. Very distressing when that happens. There's the letter I've just read. Now, coming back to the scientists started out way back in 1998 when a man called James Hansen made a presentation to the Senate Hearing Committee that carbon dioxide was the problem and we must do something about it. and it started to grow and grow from there. And then a man came along by the name of Michael Mann and did his famous hockey stick graph. Some of you may be familiar with that too. And then we had the amazing display of fraudulent work from the East Anglia Climate Research Unit in Norwich in England, where data was fabricated, it was twisted, it was changed. The effect on the climate world was just one of disgust. And how did we know that? Someone hacked their computers and all this information became available. So it was always known as the Climate Gate scandal. And that's sad when scientists do that, because it loses their credibility is lost, and the respect that they may have held is also lost, which I find in the profession very unacceptable. And this was at an IPC meeting, and the IPCC, does anyone not know what that is? That's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a United Nations body that is accepted by a lot of governments around the world as the Bible. That's what dictates their policy. Well, unfortunately, the IPCC is not a scientific body. What it does, it collects papers from various scientists, it rejects the papers it does not want, and it publishes its figures accordingly. And lately, they have been held or found wanting with quite a number of figures, and they've had to go back and apologise. Sorry guys, we got it wrong. These are the revised figures. And even today, they have come out with the next lot of temperatures, which have been revised for the third time. And that figure that's come out is, initially it was coming out that we were going to, by 2050, have an increase of temperature by 8.5 degrees Celsius. Then they revised that down to 2.5. Then they revised it down to 2. And the latest has come out, and this is the temperatures over the next 30 years will change by 0.0084 degrees Celsius, which is below our ability to accurately measure. Now, how am I going for time? 5 minutes? 4 or 5? If that's all right, I have a very short clip from Peter Temple. Now, Peter is a climate scientist in the United States. He made this clip just after the Paris Agreement, when climate issues should die down a little bit. But what Peter is saying is very relevant today, and if you don't mind, I will just put the video on.
With the Paris Climate Agreement put to bed, climate mania seems to have died down for the time being. So I think it's time for a little dose of reality, because it's getting colder and drier, and it's all because of the sun and the planets. You see, everything that happens on Earth happens in cycles. The only straight line is in man's mind. There are no straight lines in nature. Everything in nature is formed by spinning spheres or waves. So when you tell me that the temperature is going to go straight up, I become more than a little skeptical, because nothing ever goes straight up, and certainly not forever. Let's look at climate cycles over the past 11,000 years, the big picture. You can see on this diagram that we came out of the glacial period about 10,000 years ago. And then we had these up and down periods of warm and cold, cycles. It's like a giant sine wave. Temperature moves up and down over time on a highly predictable schedule. Today, we're in what's called the modern warm period, and there's climate mania, even though it's been warmer on Earth many times before. In fact, the trend line shows it's gradually getting cooler, because the sun is cooling. Nobody disputes that. Well, no astrophysicists at any rate. The next cold period is signified by the dark blue blob right below climate mania. It's starting now. But how do we know all this? Well, in the early 1900s, Dr. Raymond Wheeler, with a team of about 200 researchers, analyzed climate back about 20 centuries to 600 BC. He used tree rings and sunspot records to plot both temperature and rainfall over that entire period. He identified major climate cycles of 100, 170, 515, and 1,030 years. Now, he predicted extreme weather at about the year 2000, followed by a turn colder and a long-term drought. And sure enough, that's exactly what seems to be happening. In fact, the global temperature has gone sideways since 1998. Oh, yes, it has. And recent drop in solar activity is warning of a much colder time coming ahead. What's more, the head of the International Space Station, a Russian astrophysicist with a name I can't pronounce, has publicly predicted a mini ice age is on the way. Now, let's drill down to the most recent 4,000 years. This chart uses data from the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. It comes from the Greenland Ice Core Research Project ending in 1992. Ice cores are an extremely accurate method of determining temperature back through the centuries. What's interesting about this chart is that it accurately supports all of Dr. Wheeler's cycles. You can see the large temperature peaks every 1,030 years, the red arrows. These extremely warm and wet periods supported bountiful crops so that major societies grew to the height of their power. Dr. Wheeler called it the civilization cycle. You can see the 172-year peaks as well, the orange arrows. In almost every case, the temperature turned colder at the 172-year mark. Now, 2007 was the most recent major turn date. But the other remarkable thing about this chart is the correlation with major civilizations. When the climate turns warm and wet for long periods, the world's greatest empires have emerged. Egypt, Greece, Rome, the Mayans, the Vikings, and so on. When the climate grew colder, these great cultures fell into ruin. Bad things start to happen when climate turns cold. Rome burned as it got colder. Hadrian's Wall was built to keep out invaders at the bottom of a cold spell. Social mood always turns negative with colder climate, and that brings about riots and wars. Cold periods often get labeled as dark ages because there is little advancement in living standards. So here we are at the top of the modern warm period. Unless this time is different, the Earth is going to get a lot colder and drier, most likely for several hundred years. We'll also see a major financial collapse. Yeah, that's one of the great features of the 172-year cycle. It's happened throughout history like clockwork. So, we've spent billions of dollars on this climate mania for nothing really. We had this information more than a century ago. The sun and the planets are the main drivers of climate change on our tiny little planet. We know that. We can't change Mother Nature. It's going to get colder and drier. There's no question about that. You see, history repeats over and over and over again. So if you want to know the future, you look at the past. But of course, nobody does that. They'd much rather program computers to try to simulate what they think is man-made warming. Meanwhile, just when we're going to need more energy and warmth, we have politicians trying to tax it out of existence and shut down coal plants. If we paid attention to cycles and history, maybe we could plan for the tough times every 172 years.
Let's give a big round of applause. So great news. There's no climate emergency. Yeah. Not such great news. The Taupo District Council is using United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change information to influence their policies right now that we're paying for. With the carbon credits, the waste solid waste reductions, it's in our fuel, these things. So that was a very informative presentation. We've got the deputy mayor here, and we've got a councillor here. So they care, but we know, most people know that the climate change agenda is an agenda that we hear from the media and politicians. So we're just going to have a short period of time. If you have any questions for Dick Rennie, so just put your hand up and he'll field some questions for about 5 minutes. If you have any information you would like.
Yes.
Where do you suggest we get some of that material so that we can share it with others?
Sorry, we know.
Where do you suggest we can get some of that material for ourselves?
Interesting you asked that question. I suddenly at the last minute thought I should bring this. Now, this is a book by Ian Plimer, the professor of geology at the University of Australia. He's also been doing climate science for quite a number of years. He writes well and speaks well. And the interesting thing here was, his son came home from school one day and said, "Dad, what you're telling me and what they're telling me at school are two different things." And Ian is an aggressive Australian. He said, right, he fronted with the headmaster. And he told the headmaster his curriculum was wrong. And the headmaster said, "Look, I'm stymied. I have to do what the education department tell me." And so Ian went home and he wrote a book that had 100 questions in it. And he answered all the questions and said to his son, "Now when the teacher talks to you about it, you have the book and look it up and you can tell whether he or she is right." And he said, "But I haven't given a name to it yet." And his son said, "Well, sounds like how to get expelled from school." It's available in the bookshops. Brilliant book. It's not thick and thick, but it's got all those questions that you and I as parents and grandparents want to know. It's very readable, and it's an excellent book for anyone who wants to gain a bit more knowledge. Yes?
Just wondering, what is your opinion on the current geoengineering poisons that are being sprayed in our sky?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'll just have to get a bit closer. Sorry.
What is your opinion on the current geoengineering poisons being sprayed around our skies in New Zealand?
Are you talking about the geothermal one?
No.
Geoengineering like barium, aluminium, sodium oxide?
Okay, I'm with you on that one. Well, you saw that's another issue.
Yes.
See, those things don't have an impact on my science, if you like. But those things, if we're talking about the value of them, certainly they're valuable substances, and the world's in need of them for what we want to do, with our technology, and they form a very important part of our technology. It's a tough call. What do we do if we don't mine them? I have to say that's not an aspect that I've studied. So I'm not. I would like to. I can pick up on that, but it's something that
Can I just make a comment there?
Yeah.
I come from a family of horticulturalists. We understand that if we raise the CO2 level in glass houses by between 800 and 1200 parts per million, we'll get a harvest increase of about 30% in our crops of tomatoes. And most of us will know here that up just south of Reparoa at the current time, we are actually producing methane to heat a glass house up there, and they'll be using it from CO2. But I want to say that I come from a family of horticulturalists. We kept the weather for 99 years. My father died before we get at the 100, so it makes it more realistic. But I want to say this, that my part was about 22 years of that. We know our clouds, and we know our wind speeds and things, and we didn't have the kind of equipment that are out there now. We used to do it by hand, and I remember right from the beginning when my father first started teaching me. But around about 4 years ago, I was heading down to Carterton, and I looked at the clouds and I went, what the heck has gone wrong? And from that day, I started a research and learned about geoengineering. And I'm going to tell you some things tonight that are really, really critical. They're critical here because we have Lake Taupo that supplies water to towns and cities further north. But we are faced with geoengineering, and 3 of us have tracked those who are doing it. Right in the early days, it was the Royal New Zealand Air Force. We tracked them, and when I wrote about it in Facebook, which I probably shouldn't have ever done, they actually turned off their tracking devices, and we couldn't any longer, but we saw the evidence. I started to do some work in the area of horticulture and noticed that certain types of plants were getting hollows in their leaves. Sent it away. I knew it wasn't pathological, and I knew it wasn't insects, and we discovered that in actual fact that they were being burnt, and learned that we were looking at aluminium hydroxide or sulfide having burnt the holes. When I zoomed in on it with a camera, just a cell phone camera, I could see the nanoparticles. And so our atmosphere is literally being sprayed, and it affects the weather, it affects plant growth. I have high suspicions of what it's doing to crops, even to the point where the first year we saw a whole swath right across the North Island where farmers would say it was really, really good, but blackberry died. And restrictive leaves never set any fruit. I used a motorcycle, I travelled most of it, and I was just really interested to see what was going on. That worldwide this is taking place, and in some places it's got to the point where they're able to actually change storms. In 1948, the military in the Air Force in the States actually turned a hurricane around and sent it back in over Florida, which they didn't admit they'd done for about 10 years. But today, the things that are happening, if you go down the track of the storms and you look at them, you'll find that they're actually manipulated air, and they use what's known as ice recreation. They talked about it, and then they actually stirred up the weather, and now they're turning around saying we actually need to do something about it. So there was staged things, and we can see that actually taking place. I believe that most of us here would be aware of that, but we really want to know. I mean, if we had a military, we'd probably shoot down the aircraft. We can't do that. We're not in that position, but we actually need something done that actually would halt geoengineering of our skies, so that horticulturalists and farmers and most of our nation can begin to live in this way in which we know that we can do. But anyway, thank you.
Has anyone got a question for Dick Rennie?
I would just like to ask Dick, what do you think we as people in this community could do to encourage the climate hoax to be taken out of our policies?
Well, to me, and don't think we've not sat on our bottoms and done nothing, the New Zealand Climate Science Coalition are battling the government all the time. And we have in Taupo an amazing man called Richard Hoadley, who's got a huge database of people, and he writes to them all the time, the politicians, anybody involved, to batter them with the science as it stands. I think, he's certainly worth supporting. I think you are in a better position to talk to your children and get the right picture to the schools. I think that in the community, if we can talk about this and everybody exchanges ideas, I'm involved with a coffee morning sometimes, as Jeremy knows, and climate change is a big part of our discussions, because like the change, it is changing. And the science, there's huge amount of science coming out virtually every day. For a while I was getting 100 emails a day. and you know it's just impossible to deal with. So you can see what's happening. It's become certainly number one topic, and I think if anybody has been an ACT Party supporter, it's just come out today that kids aren't all right, and you ask the children, and climate is the number one problem they have. So if we can get a better picture and understanding to our children, that would go a long way. Yeah.
Just some.
Is there a way we could get a copy of your slides?
I don't see why not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be great.
Yeah.
Are you local?
Sorry?
Are you local?
Yeah, yeah, I live here.
Oh. Where do you have your coffee?
Jeremy's the boss, you better ask him. It's just, we meet just each Wednesday morning, just in 2 Mile Bay, and everybody's welcome. We just sit and have a discussion about things, and it's great.
Okay, we'll have one more question here then.
Steve?
How much extra would you want to pay your council tax to cure this non-existent problem?
Sorry?
How much extra are you willing to pay your council tax to cure this non-existent problem?
How much extra would you pay in tax,
Yeah.
council tax, to cure
Yeah.
this
Well,
non-existent problem?
look, that's a problem. I mean, I can't answer you accurately on that. You know, taxes changing all the time, and the amount that you pay, and yeah, I'm not comfortable. And we have some of the councillors here. Just what number of carbon credits that each council in the country is going to be required to buy? Now that's a great concern. I mean, if we're talking something, you ought to say, well, just pick a figure, say $3 million worth. That's coming straight out of your pocket as a ratepayer to buy something of totally no value.
Oh, yeah. I can speak to that.
Oh, thank you.
So the figure mentioned before was 1.8 million, that's 21-22. The most recent is 1 million. We are paying for carbon credits. The only thing we, and that includes me, I'm a ratepayer, are paying carbon credits for is for solid waste at the landfill. Interestingly, in the last few weeks, the government have released their GPS on land transport. It's the government policy statement. They have removed climate control or considerations from that policy statement. So, to answer your question, what can we do? Now is probably the ripest time in the last several years to approach your central politicians. And before you ask why we just don't pay it, well, so, you know, it's a rock and a hard place. But if central government has set the standards,
Yep.
a more recent carbon credit auction failed because the prices were so low. So again, you could argue it's an artificially inflated figure. But that's where the argument is.
Thank you.
You won't thank me for it, but Louis asked them this one.
I have a question, Kevin. Why have the dump fees? Why have the dump fees at the local dump, like the waste? Why has it gone up from $175 per tonne to $210 per tonne for general waste, which is almost a 25% increase in the last year? It's a huge increase.
Yeah, part of that is mandated from the centre, but part of it is also what we don't charge for users comes off the general rate, so it's subsidised. So you have a choice. You go, I'd like to pay less for what I'm dumping, which means everyone else pays for it through the rates. So it costs a certain amount to run the facility.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, now, just to follow that, Michael Kelly, a New Zealander, he works in Cambridge University, was asked by the Global Warming Policy Foundation to do an assessment of New Zealand under the current law or requirements as planned for 2050. I'll just quickly read this to you. The cost to 2050 will comfortably exceed $550 billion to the public of New Zealand.
What would be in calling phase one?
Yeah. Yeah. Michael Kelly. So, he's a New Zealander, but he's just, done a wonderful report here. He looked into it very thoroughly. We just can't afford that sort of expense. And at the end of it, no scientist or anybody is guaranteeing that if we take those steps, we'll get the result we want.
Shuffling money around and change the climate.
Can I just ask, is your lobbying with the current government being more effective than it has been in the past?
Yes, I can say it's not as great as we would like. I flew to Auckland and had a personal visit with Simon Watts last year. He was encouraging at the time, but following that he's been disappointing. But some of the message is getting through, and you may notice they're starting to do some changes. They're starting to ease the ETS, for instance, and you may have heard the recent announcement as far as farmers were concerned. So there are things happening, but it's being done gradually and slowly, and I think what they're wanting to do is not upset too many people who are convinced that mankind is the problem. And the other side of the coin is just saying, well, we can't upset our trading partners. If they're going to buy our beef and so forth, we need to, consider our situation of their wishes so that we can at least have a market with them. But interestingly, you've got the other three huge countries. You've got China, you've got India, and you've got Russia, who are not taking any notice whatsoever. China are building 2 power stations, coal-fired power stations, a week at the moment. India has gone back to coal as well.
And they're getting the coal from Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah. Just to run past you, Turkey is building 56 plants this year, South Africa is building 79, India 589 plants are being built this year, the Philippines 19, South Korea 58, Japan 90, China 2,063 hopefully will be built, and the little note at the bottom here, Australia is planning to shut down.
And Jack Shaw said, well, somebody's got to do it. Us.
So that's really positive to hear that there is a shift, and know that there is groups of people all around New Zealand getting together, letting their local councils, their local elected representatives know that we know that the science a lot of stuff is being based on is incorrect and agenda aligned, and so what we're doing does have an effect. Just what you are doing in your individual lives, informing your children, your grandchildren, your great grandchildren, if you're that lucky. Yeah. So keep up the good work. Also, do we have any questions for Duncan Campbell about anything council related? If we don't, because the Deputy Mayor answered a question for us, we could go to anyone who wants to, for our last 5 minutes, have a chat. If anyone has anything they want to share in the realm of the topic we're discussing. I know there's fluoride, I know there's 5G, there's other things that we are concerned about, but around this, how these policies that the local council are implementing affect our cost of living. Yeah.
Yeah, can I just ask, how many submissions actually need to be in for council to actually take notice and listen to the public?
So I said you would.
Okay, how many submissions need to be submitted from the public before the council actually takes notice?
Well, I can speak personally, I think I read every submission and just finished the submissions and deliberations on the regional land transport plan for the Waikato, which will be signed off on Friday in Hamilton. Every single one. The dilemma you have sitting in the seat that I sit in is some people will submit this side of the spectrum and others will submit on that side of the spectrum. Whatever decision we make, we're going to upset somebody. You cannot please everybody when you have diametrically opposed submissions on the same subject. So to ask me questions on his own submission is sufficient to get my attention. Yeah?
Oh, well, I would add to that, Sandy. I mean, given that we hundreds of those, someone in person presenting can't help, even though it's not supposed to, someone in person presenting can't help but have something more of an impact than for the paper. That's not listening.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd support that. I mean,
So if the council supports that, like when we had Anne presented a case in regard to fluoridation of the poisoning of the Taupo drinking water. Anyway, where did that sit with you guys? Because we all were, there's a few of us that were there, and Anne was the voice for a few of us, and that. But was there in council at that meeting, or there's been several meetings with council in regards to, the toxic fluoridation. What has happened with that? Did anybody actually listen? Did they actually go, oh yes, hey, we should look at that seriously?
so if you talk to Councillor Shepherd, she would say online 100% behind you, absolutely agree.
But all the councillors?
I can't speak for the others, okay?
Right.
What I can tell you, of 17 water intakes we've got, 2 are fluoridated, and that is mandated. You have no choice in that. That is the key.
Are you going off the authority from Bloomfield that was held up in court to say it's not right? What he actually presented was not right. So are you still following something that in court was deemed to be not right?
So I can speak to that as well. I've read the High Court decision, and yes, you're right. He breached the Bill of Rights, the Bill of Rights Act, in the context of consultation with the community. However, no relief from the court was asked for, and none was given. So those who took the appeal did not ask for his decision to be overturned, or for that to be deemed unlawful and change the decision. All they asked the court to decide on was, did he breach the Bill of Rights? And of course he did.
But you as councillors, and that are representing all of us, the public, surely if you know that that part wasn't asked, but you know yourself that it is wrong, you're still prepared to put a toxic waste product into our drinking water knowing that it could have side effects because you're following something that's incorrect.
Which brings to mind, how much leeway does the council have in determining what the population really wants compared to what the government wants? Is the council on our side or the government side?
Okay, I'll speak. Some of them have to say. As an aside, I did read some stuff a while ago that back in the 19th century, early 20th century, Westport coal was held amongst the toppest grade coal in the world for steamships and was much sought after. We're sitting on a gold mine, really. And in my background, Jenny, the climate stuff, getting back to the climate stuff for a moment, I started sort of reading, I'm an engineer by trade, started reading some of the stuff on this about 15 years or so ago, just as because it was becoming on the radar. I mean, I must have read some of the wrong books by authors like Ian Wissard, Aircon, sort of got led down that way of thinking. in terms of in getting on the topic of what can local government do, what can local politicians do, if you don't know, there's a new mayor in Kaipara right now. He's a first-term politician, as it happens, and I was talking just a couple of nights ago, and he was a businessman, local businessman before that, and he's first-term mayor, straight into local politics, and they got in the news late last year he has reversed a lot of their climate action programs, and he's telling me they've only managed to do it really because he's got a slight right-wing majority amongst the elected members, and once you have a majority you can do some stuff. And of course, but he's telling me, if one of them knocks dead or something, he's in a bit of trouble because he's only just managing to get in there. But he's estimated from the measures they've taken, and I didn't get to too much detail, but I don't think that include these carbon credits which you're sort of mandated to pay for the landfill. If you don't pay, as Kevin was saying, you'll get penalised. I don't think that he's gone so far to do that. But he estimates roughly, in the stuff he's chopped off, which includes laying a few stuff off, he saved between 1 and 2% of rates. That's his rough order estimate. And because Kaipara, I'm aware, they're in a bit of trouble. Their population's about 27,000, but they're in a bit of trouble with their wastewater plant stuff. They're in the poo, if you like. They're in a bit of debt, so their residents are really on top of them, so they're not putting up with stuff that isn't seriously needed. So that's motivating. That, I mean, elected members, if you get a majority there, that they can do stuff, and that includes, I believe that includes stuff like fluoride, because okay, the government has their. I don't think the government has any moral authority to stop you if a council decides to take out fluoride. I mean, what moral authority can they possibly have with that finding last year? Was it last year? Earlier this year? I mean, they have no moral authority, really. Was it last year?
Yes. Yeah.
They have no moral authority to come down hard on you. They have legislation there that they could be penalising you because councils, according to the Health Act, if they're already fluoridating and they decide to take it out, according to the Health Act, they can penalise councils for doing that. But really, if they tried doing that, and I believe if numbers of councils did it together, I think the whole thing would fall apart personally.
Yeah.
You call it diversity, don't you?
Because if you actually had, like when we had, representation, speaking to all those councillors, so you had 17, you said, Kevin, that were sitting around that council table.
No, 17 water intake.
Oh, 17 water intake. How many councillors were sitting at that table that we were at that meeting?
I wasn't there.
9.
Yeah.
Look, the current.
So what I'm getting at is, like, if we as a public group have got together because we're worried about not just ourselves but our, grandchildren, our children and our grandchildren and next generations, surely council have got a moral obligation when presented with facts to actually, amongst 10 councillors to look at it and go, well, actually, if we took a stand, if Taupo took a stand to central government, surely, as a collective, they should be able to make a difference.
Yes, I believe so. It would help if it wasn't just little old Taupo council.
No, that's right, but someone's always got to make the first step.
Yes,
I
believe so. Personally, and this is just my opinion, the current set of elected members are not prepared by majority to go against the flow. Okay, that's my opinion. So you're not going to get that.
So how much are we paying in our water rate? That all comes down to
rates. I don't know if we want to ask some questions. We'll just
I'll just get through my little points
Yeah,
here because I've
Keep it
got
to
one or
five.
two other things here. I did attend a local government New Zealand meet about a month ago, and there was a lawyer present there because there's some concern about the potential litigation and against councils, because unlike places like the US and the UK where local government and the central government can't really be held too accountable, in New Zealand it's a bit different, which came up through the leaky homes thing, that if, for example, and again this is more coastal rather than inland, but if, for example, they allow development in a place but sea levels rise and bad stuff happens to where they allow development, they could conceivably be sued for quite a lot. So that's quite a bit of concern for more coastal councils. So that's just something out there. And another point I will make, I think this applies all sort of councils actually. Vocal minority groups, squeaky wheels, can have undue influence on councils, council staff, elected members. You get these little climate action groups. They don't have to be too many. You know what I mean? Yeah. Vocal minorities, I believe, can have undue influence on perceptions of what the community want. And there seems to be, in my view, sort of a general expectation that the community expect us to act, to say climate action, save the planet. That's, you know, this is where something I think, rather than just, I think more random surveys of people to actually get what they really thought. If people actually recognise the true cost of some of the stuff and what it's for and why. My rough order estimate, based on talking to Cop Premier, is that each ratepayer is probably paying several is a fluffy term, several $100 every year towards this stuff.
Towards climate stuff.
Yeah, climate action stuff. Several $100. Yeah. I mean, you put a number on it. I mean, if it's for legitimate reason, you're saving the planet. I mean, that seems like a pretty good deal, doesn't it? but anyway, that's so greater transparency. I don't think people realise what they're paying for and why. Yes.
Surely one of the things we need is better communication. We need some public meetings. Why do we not have public meetings?
I reckon it's a good idea.
We have a mayor and I email him, and mostly he doesn't reply. When he does, he doesn't address the issues. He just says he's received my email.
Well, practically speaking, this is a public meeting.
I know.
And I think, practically speaking, it takes outsiders to organise it to make it happen. That seems to be the way.
I'll play more.
Excuse me, Duncan.
Yes.
Can you tell us how much it costs to fluoridate our water? Like, how much the council pays a month or a year, or how much we pay in our rates?
No, I don't know actually.
Individually?
No, I don't know.
Because I mean, that's a cost that could be white.
Yes.
We've got to buy the poison, and then they put it in our water.
Yeah, I know.
And we're trying to get it out.
It's slightly counterintuitive, isn't it?
And if it's a sharp choice, you can buy toothpaste of fluoride in it, you can buy fluoride tablets, so the facility.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, do you have anything else you'd like to?
No.
Okay, let's give Duncan a big hand, please.